Let me know when.
Hey everybody, here we are in Enchanted Living Forest Therapy, Inner Harmony Forest Therapy Certification Program. And we are on we're going to be talking about lesson 3. Got a little mixed up because I was not well for last week, but I did that little makeup recording for you guys to answer some questions. So for all intents and purposes, today we are going to be talking about how lesson 1 went for you, how lesson 2 went for you, any questions around those things, and then dive a little bit into lesson 3. And before I turned the recording on, the girls who are here, we were chatting, and Melanie shared a really cool, I don't know whether you want to call it an inspirational quote, but a piece of information. So Melanie, would you share with us what you just shared with the little group?
Sure. So I was at it's a tour, a Harriet Tubman Museum tour in Cape May. And this young girl who's maybe 9 is sitting in the front row. And the docent turns to her and asks her how old she is. And she says she's 9. And he said that when girls connect with nature, they become amazing women. And he said, let me say it again. When young girls connect with nature, they become awesome, amazing women. And then he talked about Harriet Tubman and how at the age of 9 or 10, she spent time in the woods with her father, learning to be what ultimately was a conductor of people on the Underground Railroad, finding their way to freedom from slavery. And he talked about how the skill set she needed to do that, she learned in the woods with her father. She learned how to heal. She learned herbology. She learned about nature, how to survive in nature, how to find food in nature, how to navigate through nature. And she went down as far south as West Florida and as high north as Canada, northern Canada, helping people to freedom. It was very inspiring.
Very inspiring, and very inspiring, I think, for all of us forest therapy practitioners of the value of introducing people into nature. And whether it's young people or people of any age, when we reconnect, I think it ignites within us um, healing abilities, right? Of I'm not going to say nature heals us, but it ignites within us that ability to heal ourselves, as well as allows us to feel calm and strong as we observe what goes on in nature. And whether you take it from the tenets of ancient Taoism that looks at all the cycles and the seasons and how nature is inspiration, or Native American with the medicine wheel, same kind of philosophy of learning from nature. It's something that we can bring to all of our forest therapy sessions. So thank you, Melanie, for that. And I don't know, now I'm feeling like I need to schedule another forest therapy that's like dads and daughters or something, that brings people together in that way and has them experience the magic of the forest. Before I open it up for questions today, because a lot of it's going to be questions from the gals who are here online. And if those of you watching later have questions, of course, email them into the group. But I did pull a card for us today. And today's lesson 3 is about bringing the magic to forest therapy. And of course, different groups have different levels of magic you might talk about, but let's go fully invested. And so the card deck that I am going to pull a card, or I already pulled the card. I was thinking about all of you, and I pulled the card from Denise Lynn's Sacred Forest Oracle deck. And I chose this one, of course, because it's a forest, right? So everything in this deck has a connection to forest or nature in some way. So I shuffled the deck, and it's one of my favorite decks, and I am such a unicorn Pegasus person. This is like the back picture on the deck. It's got beautiful Pegasus and this girl riding off into the forest on it. And so when I shuffled, the card that came out for us today, when I was thinking of all of us, is Mystic Meadow. And look at, it's got a bear, it's got a rabbit dressed up as royalty, it's got a fox, right? It is magical. There's sort of a castle in the background, but its message is sanctuary. So as I read this, think about how this might pertain to you or for all of us today. It says, the creatures and mystical beings of the forest know that the meadow at the center of the woods is a safe place where one can truly relax and feel comforted. When you step into this luminous meadow, it's not uncommon to see animals such as deer curled up alongside sleeping bears. Foxes and rabbits lounge side by side. Unicorns, fairies, and elves all gather in the mystic meadow. You feel relaxed, healthy, and clear. It says this card appears to remind, as a reminder to replenish your inner resources. It's time to renew your energy and make tending to your own needs a priority. Practice extreme self-care. Protect yourself from less than positive influences in your life. This message is about taking shelter. Retreat into your home or spend time in places and with people where you feel at home. Mend your physical objects, organize your possessions, heal relationships. There is the possibility of a huge spurt of energy in the future, but unless you take this time to create foundations and nourish yourself, you might be overwhelmed by it all and miss the opportunities available to you later. This card also means that blooming and expansion are at hand. Flowering success awaits you. Healing energy is growing and beautiful things are to come. I love this card for all of us. I will say I take it personally as like a, yes, it was good for me to rest and relax while I was ill with COVID. And I think I might rest and relax some more even without being sick. I think this is what it's telling me. But I'm just going to go around. Linda, what does this card mean for you right now?
There's a few things. I mean, the immediate one, and I did post it in the chat. I mean, sanctuary, how fitting to follow up the Harriet Tubman reference, right? Because all of the people that she led them to sanctuary.
Yes, she did. A safe place. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anji, what's it mean for you?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I I love being in my little forest, which I don't share yet with anybody else, and it feels always so enchanted and magical. And it often I meet many animals there, from deers to sometimes a black bear when I retreat back to my farmland. And I have bunnies here, foxes, and I have to make sure that they stay in their space and my animals also farm in theirs. But it is a lovely communication and I love it and it represents it so well. I hope I can share this magic with many more people.
Exactly. They will come to your place and they will feel this feeling of sanctuary, because it's not like going to a park, right? Nobody else is going to be there. It is going to be a very safe place for them to be. Beautiful. Melanie, what's it mean for you?
I really love this glow, this luminous light, and thinking about the ability of of bringing myself to that light, bringing others to that light. We were talking earlier today about feeling like I want to be an abolitionist, but the kind that helps free people from self-limiting thoughts and beliefs. And sees themselves as that light potential of wherever it is and whatever it is they want to do. And since I particularly love helping teenagers, I think that that's really a critical piece of what I even see the whole forest therapy allowing me to help them do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think with the population you be talking about, Melanie, I think that they are much more open to working with ideas around fantasy and magic and
Mhm.
the mystery of it. I love that. Well, I think that's an inspiring card for us all. So again, I apologize for missing last week, but last week would have been talking about any questions around your homework or doing that preparation week. And that preparation week is probably the least fun week of all of them, but it's an important one, right? It's an important one to go out and really be aware of not just the beautiful and the magical pieces of nature, but when taking other people out or even being out yourself, how can you really relax if it's not safe? And so what are those safety things to look at? And so I wanted to throw it open here to any questions and or anything else that came up in your mind or the place that you might have found. And yeah, Melanie.
Well, I think you may have addressed this in one of the audios I listened to, but I still would love to hear what you say about it live. So I took a walk to a park where I can imagine taking people, and I realized pretty early on that I thought it was very accessible. And then when I started thinking about wheelchairs and walkers and canes, I realized that the streets that were seemed like the easiest to access the park were not, that the parking lot wasn't bad, but very limited in numbers of spaces. And one thing that came up across a few times is this is a good thing and a not good thing. There's lots of caretakers, people around this park doing things to, I guess, beautify it. But that means there's very loud, smelly leaf blowers. There are these guys driving around on these carts with stuff that you almost have to jump out of the way. And I thought, wow, how do you handle that? And I guess you talked a little bit about incorporating it. You can't predict when they're going to be there. It's like not like I mean if they have a schedule, it's unclear to me what it is, because I have run into them as early as 7:30 in the morning, and as late as dusk, and there are paths that they go on, but like they're on these little like all terrain vehicles, so it doesn't stop them from going across grassy areas. So I'm not sure how to handle that. I assume if I was there with a group of people, maybe they would stay away, but I don't know. I don't know that they would. They kind of act like they own the place.
So most of the times I would leave forest therapy here because I have here. The times that I didn't though, and I used some of the local parks, I would always check with the park office and to find out what was scheduled for that day, what would be going on that day. And I would tell them what particular part of the park I wanted to be in. And a lot of times it was also because I wanted to reserve a shelter, right? And the shelter was I had that for a couple reasons. One is that there was a good place to start, right? A good place to have people gather. We're going to be at shelter 3. You can park there and come into the shelter. And I don't know about everywhere else, but the shelters here are just pavilion roofs with no sides on them and some picnic tables underneath. But it gave me that opportunity in talking to the park people to explain, I'm going to be doing a forest therapy program, which we're enjoying nature, we're looking at nature, and, as much as possible, I want it to be quiet and not have other groups around. So are there other groups in the neighboring shelters at that same time? I'm not telling them don't book it. I'm asking the question, what else is going on at the same time? And they were always very willing to like make notes and say, and keep it clear of other people, because it wasn't even an all day thing, it was like a 2-hour thing. So that would be my suggestion, is seeing if talking to the park people. And then here's the thing, stuff always comes up. Like you think, oh, I've done such good homework on making sure everything is just perfect. And then stuff happens. I remember I was leading a class here one time And, you know, I have control of who's on the property and that nobody is going to be mowing while I'm doing it. And yet, this one session, somebody had this like a little airplane and they were like flying really low over like my farm and the neighboring farm. And I'm like, this is not normal. This doesn't normally happen. There's no way I can stop it. So then it was just, maybe you're observing the airplane now. And just imagine, what does the airplane mean to you, right? What is the message that an airplane might bring to you? And so it's not telling them pretend it's not here, because that's hard. It's just, this is a part of what's going on in nature. Human beings are part of nature too, right? And so what is the message from this sound, this noise, this object that appeared? Does that help?
Okay. Yes. Yeah, we do something like that in hypnosis when we're doing hypnosis one-on-one with people, which I've been doing for 35 years. Is that when something unexpected happens, you just weave it in, and maybe suggest that they find something meaningful to them in there, or just to note it in, and then to allow them to shift to then another thing that they notice.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, it could even be, what do you think the trees think of the sound? What do you think the birds think of the sound, right? You can just redirect the focus back into how is nature responding to it, you know?
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Angie, yeah.
First of all, I would like to thank you for taking the time to answer my questions in great detail. That was very well, I appreciate it, and it was very helpful. I have two more questions. One is, there are no bathrooms around where I chose my location. I really don't know what to do about it. I could meet a little bit. No, I can't, because even a little bit further away, there are seasonal bathrooms, but they will be closed after, well, probably now, but at least after Thanksgiving, Canadian Thanksgiving. And the other question is, what do I do about people walking and joining our group? I have no problem with that, but I know that some of the people who participate and pay for this, they will have a problem with it.
Yes, those are excellent questions. So the no bathroom question, that will be on you to tell people up front that there are no restroom facilities at this location, okay? And then make sure that your forest therapy concludes, right? Like that you have a start and end time and you stick to it, and that it's probably not more than 2 hours. Because if people have to drive there and get back, I don't know, people have small bladders, I think, sometimes. So that's how I would just tell people up front.
Okay, thank you.
And then remind me again of your second question.
The second question is, when people join.
Oh, yes, okay.
Come to us and join the group.
So remember that backpack I showed you guys that said forest therapy session that I wear, right? And so when people come up and maybe people are in the middle of doing an invitation where they're touching trees, or, you know, they're doing their very slow conscious walking or whatever, and people come up and they're like, oh, what are you guys doing? It's our responsibility as the forest therapy practitioner to go and say, hi, oh, we're doing a forest therapy program, and I'd love for you to be a part of it sometime. Have your business card or have a flyer or something that how they can get in touch with you, and just explain, these people have already pre-registered and filled out all the information, but I'd love to have you at a future session, and here's my information. And I have found that people were like, oh, thank you very much. And then all of a sudden, when it sounds like you might be trying to sell them something, right? Just that little bit of, I'd love to have, then they leave. Okay. So,
What if they just follow along? Very quietly.
I guess I haven't had anybody ever do that.
Mhm.
LuAnn, can I
Yeah, go
volunteer
ahead.
something?
Mhm.
So earlier this year in May, I did a retreat in France. And what they have where we were is they had walking tours, but they're not paid walking tours. You tip at the end of the tour. So I'm wondering if you could weave that in somehow and say, if people do want to follow along, say, there are some people, some of you, thank you very much. For those of you that have paid in advance, um, it's X amount of dollars at the end of the tour. Could you do that? Would that be uncomfortable?
I guess I can learn to do this.
I was gonna say, I'm trying to imagine if somebody would have stayed or had asked, can I join? Right? Then I would probably um say yes and explain, we can settle up financially at the end of the program and leave it at that and let them be a part. When somebody joins, I'm like a mother hen. Like I worry about people, right? And so if somebody is now a part of my group and I don't know their emergency contact information, I don't know if they have any specific medical issues, like then that becomes a little bit of a worry for me. But it would be one of those things is like, hey, new clients falling out of the sky for forest therapy. That's kind of cool. So so those are some ideas, and you can decide which one feels the most
Okay.
appropriate for you.
Thank you so much.
It's more a challenge when there are people who are around and start being noisy. And then you have to go explain to them that we're doing this meditation type of process. And would it be possible for them to move to a different part of the park at this time? Right? That I've only had to do that like once. And that people were very gracious. They were like, oh, okay, I'm sorry. And they went off. But
Okay.
cool. So it sounds like Melanie, I know you had a place that you've spec'd out, and Anchi, you have. Linda, have you gotten to look for a place yet?
Got a couple of places in mind, and it's interesting, Melanie, where you are today. I mean, I'm thinking about doing a beachfront, which I know is completely different, but I think one of the things, LuAnn, you said early on was forest therapy doesn't necessarily need to occur in a forest, and we can frame it in different ways. So I'd like to do that. And again, I mean, it is definitely, believe it or not, this beach that I'm thinking about is handicapped accessible. It does have a ramp and the rubber mat that's out there. They certainly, if someone was participating in a wheelchair, they wouldn't be able to go all the way along the beach. But I think that would be something interesting. So I'm kind of trying to get my head wrapped around what that would look like and if that would be seasonal. I
Mhm.
mean, certainly a beachfront, if you're just a beach goer, sun and sand would be good. But I think if you're looking at more of a nature appreciation and a little bit of a meditation, it would be better maybe early in the morning or maybe off season. So I'm kind
Mhm.
of trying to think about what that might look like.
I agree. It would be something that you'd want to do before it got busy or hot, right? And one of my graduates, her name is Karen Mulcahy. And if you're in the Facebook group, you might see her post sometimes. And I think most all of the forest therapy that she's led has been at a beach because she lives near a beach.
Oh,
And so so she's done a lot with like early morning, watch the sunrise, um, nature therapy, forest bathing kind of session. And, there's a little bit of trees around there, but it's mostly focused on the beach and the ocean.
Okay.
So
And
absolutely.
here I thought it was a novel idea.
It is, but still, it probably is where you are. So, but here's the thing, if you get stuck, that's somebody who's been doing it.
Right. Good call out. Thank you. Okay.
Go ahead, Mel.
Oh, and I was going to say, it depends on the kind of beach you're talking about, because I've been all over Maine and they have these rocky beaches with lots of trees that are growing in between the rocks, and places that are park-like areas that are right next to those trees. So they don't necessarily, it's not exactly the large expanse of, many feet of sand and just scrubby sand dunes. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think there are ways to do it in places where there are trees and shrubs. And I can imagine if you were somewhere in the South, there might be palm trees.
Mm-hmm.
They're trees.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And live oaks.
And really, anytime we bring the plant kingdom in, right, we are looking at what kind of scent they put out into the air that is their form of communication. It's not just trees that use scent as communication. All plants do, right? It's how they attract the pollinators to them. It's how they send their messages out. I know, Linda, you have to pop out and then we'll see you back in a little bit. So I'm glad you guys have found places that you're going to be holding it. And, those safety concerns, it is because we're leading a group. But for our second lesson, it was now you're going to take yourself out. And have either of you gotten that opportunity to download that guided forest therapy session and take yourself out on it?
Not yet.
Okay, so when you do, okay, it's to give you that sense, and you'll get the sense of the structure of a forest therapy program, the way I lead it and teach it. And there's a lot of different ways to do forest therapy, okay? The structure that I came up with it from what other people were doing in forest therapy, but also then looking at the science behind why different scientists think forest therapy works, why it works, that when we're out in nature, it causes these healing effects within our body. So by pulling those in, it was kind of like, all right, well, let's create a recipe that gives us that opportunity to invoke those healing responses. So that structure that's in that lesson, that on my page here, it talks about how we're going to welcome people in, how we're going to do some qigong or some other kind of exercise movement, then have an official kind of ceremonial entry into nature, activate our senses, do some conscious walking, some invitations, some earthing. And in between that, we are going to give people those opportunities to talk a little bit. And then finishing it up with some refreshments, some sharing, and then again, giving gratitude and talking about how we can give back to nature, how we can be that ambassador to encourage people with some other practices. So that's kind of the nutshell of it, but then you can kind of mix it up, right? And have fun with it and make every session a little different. One of the things I wanted to ask you gals, because you all do different things, and Mel's here, I know what she does on some things. So I'm going to start with Anchi. And I'm going to start with what kind of energy or stretching or movement practices do you already do that you might be comfortable leading your forest therapy group through?
Oh, I'm an Eden energy medicine practitioner, so I would start with a daily energy routine. And this takes about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the group, I guess. You're there for. I have no problem extending this a little bit. I know a little bit Qigong, a little bit yoga. I would do this.
And you
And
don't have
I
to
would
do,
probably do some breathing exercises, because it is so
yes,
important that for once people calm down, but also that their sense is open for whatever we
absolutely.
might encounter.
So I'm glad that you're already comfortable, confident leading people through something like that. Because I've had forest therapy students who haven't ever led anybody or taught anybody kind of a physical practice, right? And there can be kind of if you've never done it before, to stand in front of a group of people and say, all right, now we're going to move our arms like this, it can feel a little bit intimidating. So, Mel, I know that you've probably taught people many times Qigong movement, right? Or other movements.
Right, right. Many, I mean, I've taught lots of Qigong, both bringing down, I mean, I use bringing down the heavens, which I think you described with slightly different words, but the same thing. And I've taught people different purgations as well, which involve breathing techniques. And I've also incorporated some yoga movements, because sometimes those are very familiar to people if they've done anything like that. And I'll weave in some mindfulness practices or some pranayama breathing techniques as well. I mean, I haven't designed what I would do very specifically for the beginning of a forest therapy session, but I think those are the things that seem to come most easily to the beginning. And I think some of it is just thinking of how much time for each part. This is my metal side. You know, I'm like the structure of like how many minutes on this, how many minutes on that, how many minutes that, so I can make sure I don't run over my hour and a half or 2 hours, because I've done entire hour long qigong or yoga / pranayama breathing sessions, and that's not the same as this. This is an opportunity to shift people out of their head and into, I would say, their body and grounding.
Yes. Yeah, it is. We're just taking it step by step, and it's like, first we're talking logistics about turn off your cell phone. We're going to be walking for this long. Make sure you're dressed appropriately. Do you need to put on your bug spray or your sunscreen? Like, those are all that welcome. And then that next step is like, oh, now we're going to do some stretching and some breath work. We're just going to get ready for our movement and doing our forest therapy practice. And so that's where then, and part of it is even for ourselves as leaders, right? We're going from that very, 5-element metal theory, like where it's all mental, like we got to do this in our checklist. Do I have everybody's registration sheet? Do I have all your contact information, blah, 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 all this stuff, and we're ready to go. Then it also allows us to breathe more deeply, right? To kind of slow ourselves down and shift our mind into, okay, now we're going to be leading people into nature. And we're going to want to embrace that by talking more slowly, right? By maybe even lowering the tone of our voice, because if we don't, we're like, all right, now we're going to breathe really deeply and breathe out, and we're going to do it really slow. Ready? Go ahead. Go breathe in and breathe out. Okay, very good. All right, now we're going to walk over here. And we're going to step and there's an aspect of like when you've got your checklist and you know that this is for 2 hours and you're going to do all of these things. I know my brain can go into like, we got to stay on time. We got to do, but we really need to slow down, be in the moment. And when we slow down, we encourage our people to slow down, right? So the same way as we start our forest therapy practice, like we don't just explain we're going to activate the senses. We do that along with them, right? We take the time to listen and notice what we're hearing. We take the time to see and notice what we're seeing. Yeah, we've got to pay attention to our whole group, but we are slowing ourselves and creating the energy for the group, kind of like the permission for the group to slow down and focus on these things. So I know for people who have never led people through something before, just that aspect of being in front, being the leader, having people watch them can be a little bit intimidating. And so I thought maybe I'd ask you girls, what advice could you give to somebody who hasn't been through something like this before, hasn't ever done something like that before?
Practice it in front of the mirror. And then practice it in front of people who love you. And it doesn't hurt to write out a script if you're somebody who feels like they're not comfortable with the wording, because the wording is kind of important. Like I don't use the TRY word, except for talking about things in the past, because I don't want anyone to walk into the future with anything other than confidence of exploring and doing something and checking it out. So sometimes writing out your introduction and saying it a few times, even if you're saying it to your animal friend or a stuffed animal or a child who just loves you and doesn't care that they're going to go play while you talk. Because the more you say it, the more comfortable you get with the words. And then eventually it doesn't feel scary and weird.
Good advice. Anchi, what advice would you give?
Well, there was a time when I was not very good in English. Maybe I'm still not. I don't know.
You're excellent in English.
Thank you. But I'm a fine artist, and at that time I was teaching art classes, and at that time to children. And the children were not the problem, but the parents. I had to meet the parents in the beginning. And I was so nervous. I mean, they would trust me with their children, with their most precious human beings. And I would go before I would go to the bathroom and I would just do the figure 8 between me and them. Yeah, this is I think this is really the best advice I can give. Walk the trail, be confident where you're going, know about the places that things can happen, that after weather changes, the landscape can change, and prepare yourself to be really grounded, and then really doing a figure 8 between people and you. It does help. It is magic.
It is magic. And it is a part of, like, before you lead your first forest therapy session with other people in it, that's why it's important to take yourself in that place and practice it, right? Do it, lead yourself on a forest therapy session there. And okay, I can be outside here at my place and there's nobody else here. So I can talk out loud here. I can practice what I want to say, how long it will take, how long it takes for me to walk from this place to this place. But I would encourage you to do the same thing, like a rehearsal, right? And even if you don't want to say the words out loud, have the words go through your mind of what you would say to your group in this place and what you would have them notice or what you would have them do. Because it creates that pattern, right? Like you were saying, practice the words. And the more you hear the words, or the more you say the words, it then makes it so much easier to, as you're leading the group, for those words to be the words that come out, right? Because you've practiced it. You kind of already saw it in your mind how you were going to do it. Part of our recipe for success in forest therapy is this aspect of circle sharing. And circle sharing is when we let people talk. What I discovered Forest therapy is generally a practice where when people, part of that welcome introduction is like, this is a kind of a silence practice, right? This is not where I'm going to lecture about what type of tree this is or what kind of bug that is. This is a silence practice for you to observe and notice. And so we want everybody to be quiet. We want cell phones to be off. But there will be those times where you get to share. And what I found is it was important to include these circle sharing moments, because if I didn't, what tended to happen is some people don't seem to have the ability to be quiet and still have their attention focused for that long. It also, once somebody's had an experience, it kind of deepens and validates that experience if they get to share about it for just a moment, just for one word or one sentence. Another thing I've tried without circle sharing is I've given everybody little journal books and a pen, and that after their forest therapy invitation, that then I gave them 3 minutes to write in their journal book so they could capture the what it is that they noticed and what it meant to them. And so that's another way for them to capture it and get to express if you don't want to do circle sharing. So there has to be some way for them to kind of process and record what they've observed or what they've noticed or what message came through for them. You all that are here have led groups, right? And so have you noticed what power there is in allowing people to share, but also how you need to contain it so you can move on to the next event, right? So there's something called a talking stick. And have you guys heard of talking sticks before? Okay. So it's a Native American tradition where when people were in a circle and they're sharing about their opinions about something or sharing about something, that rather than going back and forth like that, it's whoever is holding the talking stick is the one who gets to talk, and then everybody else listens. And so when I explain about a talking stick, and I use those in my circle sharings sometimes, is that it's not just that the person who's holding the stick is talking and other people are watching the birds or doing whatever. Everybody has a job, and either you are the one with the stick and you are talking, and everybody else is listening. There's a word, a Native American word, aho, that it doesn't mean yes, I agree. It means I hear you in a translation. And so I encourage people at the end of somebody's circle sharing that the rest of the people say, aho, I hear you, right? It doesn't mean that they have to agree that they thought that that bird was beautiful or whatever that person said or whatever the meaning was for them. It is the signal that I heard you. And it can be very powerful for people to actually have been heard and acknowledged. Yeah, Anji.
I had the problem before. What if you give somebody the talking stick and they talk and talk and never stop? Because some people have finally the opportunity to express themselves and they never stop. Can you just go and take the
I
talk?
set the guidelines before I hand out the talking stick. So either I will say, like, let's say there's 10 people in the group and I've decided I'm going to allow them to, it's going to be a 10-minute circle sharing. They can each have a minute. So I will say, you have 1 minute, and I'll look at my watch, to share. Generally, I will say, in one sentence, or share 3 words about the tree that you've just connected with, right? So I will make it very specific, and I'll give them, a moment to think about what their 3 words are, or what their one sentence is. And if somebody goes beyond that, I'll give them a little bit of a free pass for a little bit. And then I'll just kind of smile and say, no, you're so excited about this. Thank you. Aho. And so I just kind of wrap it up that way. At the end, I have a longer circle sharing, right? And that way, if people do feel like they need to leave or get going, we're almost at the end anyway, and people know we're kind of at the end and they don't talk as long. But that's where I'll have more of the longer sharing and devote more time to it. That's a really good question. Well,
And so there's the other end of that, which is that sometimes someone just doesn't want to share.
mhm.
And I'm interested to hear how you handle that.
If they don't want to share, and we're using the talking stick.
Mhm.
I just have them hold the stick for a moment and they can just think about what it is that they experienced. And then when they're ready to send the stick on, then we just say, aho. And we just still acknowledge that they've had something. And some people, and I've had people who come to forest therapy and say, I am only here because my wife wanted to do this today. And they're not really excited to be there at all, right? So if it's going to be, what did the tree have to tell you? Basically, they haven't got anything to say about that. And that's fine. So I don't force anybody to. Interestingly, though, some of those, and they've been men, some of those guys have come up after it's all over and the other people are gone. And they said, you know what, that was really wonderful. And I enjoyed that so much more than I thought. And I really reconnected with how it felt to be in the woods when I was a boy. And it brought back so many good memories.
Yeah.
So I know they still got value. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit, though, about the next lesson, even though you haven't gotten all of lesson 2, but that's okay. I just want to introduce, because I'm kind of passionate about one of the aspects about this next lesson. Although maybe I'm wondering if we should wait till Linda comes back on. Maybe we'll wait till Linda comes back on. You guys okay with that? Because there's still plenty that we could talk about on
I have a question.
Yeah.
Now we are fairly early in our program, in our course. However, when can we take people into the forest first? Do we need to have a little bit more knowledge, or can we start maybe next weekend or so?
You can start next weekend,
That's
because
awesome.
part of what you're going to need to do to get certified is take some people out on a forest therapy practice. So the biggest thing for me is that people do the safety piece first. They know the place they're taking somebody is safe and that it's going to be safe for that person that they're taking to be in that environment. But once you've done that, then yeah, go for it.
It's like, it's so funny to ask for permission to take somebody out into the forest, but
No, you have permission. And if you're using it as one of your, certification, then what you're going to want to look at is how am I going to incorporate all of those recipe pieces.
count.
Oh, we've got that puppy. And I know I saw that Kato is there somewhere, and Linda's cat was in the background for a while there. I don't know.
He just came trotting over and then he saw I was going to do something to him and then he went to go get a toy. That's not really your toy. That toy is bigger than, look at this toy. This toy is bigger than him.
Oh my
And yet
gosh.
he is dragging this darn thing around and then when you drop it, it goes thump. But
He's
it
so
doesn't,
proud of it.
I'm very proud of it. Here, come up here. Come get it here. I'm not getting it. I'm not playing right now.
You know, that was such a good question that you asked about bringing dogs on forest therapy. And so, do you have a group of people with well-behaved dogs that you thought you would lead a forest therapy program on?
Yes, I have a client coming up from the city, and I think she will bring her friend, and
Mhm.
she's dealing with anxiety. And I know they both have dogs who are wonderful and they behave, but they are like a security blanket to these
Yes.
people.
Mhm.
And I would never introduce people with dogs to a group who has no dogs with them or have the
Mhm.
group too big. But I think it would be good for them if they took their dogs. They would feel much more secure.
Mhm.
I would never bring my dog, of course.
Mhm.
Sorry, Anton.
I think in that specific situation where it is a therapy dog, like that.
It's not really a therapy dog, but I know that she would feel much more content. And
Mhm.
also, she would feel uncomfortable leaving her dog behind because they are so
Right.
much together.
And the challenges that I have had has been that it might not have been, in my judgment, the best forest therapy session for them because they get focused on their dog, right? But after you asked the question and I answered, I thought, well, maybe though, if you did have a group with their dogs that are well behaved, like, you know, that are used to being around lots of people and lots of dogs because they go everywhere with their owner, right? That it could be a very specific forest therapy session, that the invitations are around how does your dog experience this spot in nature? What is your dog noticing? What do you think your dog smells here? What do you think dog's vision is different? What do you think the tree looks like to the dog? And that way they can be focused on their dog and not worried about their dog, but also it gets them out of their own mind in those ways and they're working with all of their senses. So that could be an experiment.
I love your idea. I love it. I have another idea in mind, and this is I work with animals as well, and they are often people who are very lonely and they have their dog and they well, these dogs are everything to them,
Mhm.
but these dogs become sick because they treat them as humans, right? And I would love to go with these kind of people into a forest or nature therapy with a dog in mind and really teach these people to be silent with their dogs and just pick up what's well, this inter species connectedness, right? That they can communicate with their animals without words, because I think this would benefit the dogs so much.
I think it would too. And we all know that our pets pick up on our energy. And so if the person gets more relaxed and calm and has
Well,
health benefits, the pets will too.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah. It benefits both of them for sure. It's
Mhm.
not that I do this for the dog, but
Oh no, we can be biased and say we just want to help the animals. I led a forest therapy program last year with a group of people that do therapy that includes horses. And so, you know, we were out in the pasture and the horses were there. And so the forest therapy, part of the forest therapy practice was for us to observe the horses and notice how the horses reacted to different sounds. How did the horses react to the breeze that's coming through? How, and then imagine what it would feel like to be a horse, that whenever, as you're walking on this ground, what would you notice about this ground? Would it feel good on your hooves, right? And so it was very much imagining how the horses were experiencing the environment, and then what it would feel like to be a horse in this environment. And people loved it. Like they really, and then at the end they got to pet the horses. So, you know, it was all good.
Which brings me to another question. How is that insurance related when you bring people to your farm and their animals, for example?
So I did this at another place that is already set up, and they had all of the insurance forms. It was their farm, it was their horses. So they had all the forms for people to sign that said, if the horse steps on me, I can't sue. Right. So.
Okay. Thank
You just gave me the idea to do this with some folks that I did an energetic horse equine experience, maybe early in June. That was really, really interesting. And I was thinking of doing some Qigong with them. But now I'm thinking maybe we could more formally integrate forest therapy to that site, because it's actually in an area where there are beautiful trees. It's set up quite well for places to walk and rest.
Mhm.
And they had a little like refreshment nibble at the end that was also very nice. And it's designed to be set up to observe the horses anyway.
Mhm.
They're probably doing forest therapy and not really realizing that's what they're doing.
Right. Right. Okay. Linda, we were just finishing up if there was any questions around that lesson 2 that was kind of the recipe, right? The recipe around creating a forest therapy experience. And then I wanted to talk about what's coming up with lesson 3. But before we move on to that, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
No questions, but just a comment. I mean, LuAnn, I really like the way you set up the program. Again, my conversation earlier about forest therapy not necessarily being in a forest. I love that you've been able to open everything up and give us some more breadth. You know what I mean? There are so many things. Again, I have so many ideas as you're talking about horses. Maybe it's something on horseback. Maybe going through the forest, you don't actually walk, you go on horseback. I'm talking about doing a retreat and there might be a riverboat cruise. So incorporating a little bit of, nature that way, because you're going to be seeing things and doing things. So just thank you for that gift of opening everything up and knowing that it's not just a walk through the meadow.
Yes. Yes. Well, lesson 3 is, I'm just going to share my screen for a minute so we can all see it. It starts to take some of those pieces that are in the recipe that kind of talk about in lesson 2 as an overview, and breaks them down more specifically. So when it talks about the forest practices, it breaks it down with kind of a 4-element approach of how you can design your forest therapy session. Like if it's going to be at the ocean, there's going to be a lot of water-based practices, right? And knowing that water can relate to our emotions. So those could be really powerful sessions for people who need to process some kind of emotion, right? Because there's going to be this water that they could think about releasing their emotions into, or noticing how the water flows around rocks that try to stop it, right? There's all sorts of different practices based on each element. Earth tends to be, those earth practices can be anything from like we're going to get real close to the dirt. We're actually going to observe the dirt and what's in the dirt and what does dirt look like? What does it feel like? Or it could be noticing what walks on the earth and looking at animal tracks, or having them bring a blanket, put it down and lay down on the ground and notice what gravity feels like, right? We all think we know what gravity feels like, but when we actually talk about gravity and how that feels when you lay this direction, and especially if you find a hill, like have people lay with their head going up the hill, and then have people lay with their head going down the hill, and just notice that experience of gravity on their body. All of these are different earth-based practices. And air-based practices, well, that's, again, you can have the blanket there, and now you're gonna watch the sky, you're gonna watch the clouds, see what kind of formations, what do you see in these cloud formations? What story does it tell you? You can also do things with air that you're noticing the scent in the air. And you might imagine like having people breathe in, notice what scent's there, and then maybe turn in different directions. See if they can tell where that scent is coming from. Maybe conscious walking towards it and just noticing, am I getting closer? Am I getting further away? Right? It sounds playful. It is playful. And that's the importance of it. These invitations or these practices are giving people permission kind of to play outside in a way that is just with them, themselves, and what they notice. Water practices, again, have a lot of emotion aspect, but it's also a way that if you like the idea of ceremony, that you could have people do ceremony and release their intentions into the water, maybe by having them hold some pebbles with intentions for, prayers for peace or prayers for healing, and then toss them into the water and know that their prayers are now being taken by the water to connect with all the other water in the world. So there's a lot of fun, different ways, different kinds of forest therapy programs that you can develop. I'm going to say every one you make can be different from the next one, even if you're using exactly the same location, because you can focus on different elements. You can focus on different ways we're doing these practices so that people get different results with each one. Fire, fire is an element, but we're not actually going to take fire into the forest. That's a little bit dangerous. But we look at fire energy as being everything that has to acknowledge life. Life force is like that spirit, that fire energy. So it can be paying attention to the animals in the forest and what they're doing. It could be having a conversation with a tree. It can be interpreting, they call it your life's journey, but as you're walking through the forest and you notice that the tree bark is really rough on this tree, and you might say something like, the rough bark of the tree is my life's journey because my life has had some bumpy spots lately and this and that. So it's like kind of looking at what you're observing in the forest and how is this a part of my life's journey? What's that symbolism in my life's journey? So all of these are different ways we can incorporate the elements. You can also do fun things as an invitation, like walking a labyrinth. So if you find a place that has a labyrinth, maybe you include that as one of your forest therapy invitations, that everybody's going to walk the labyrinth. When I had one of my in-person classes here, a couple, and when people come here, they each have to design a forest therapy session that they lead their classmates on. And so a couple of them work together to make a labyrinth in my parking lot, which was really fun. And there's so many different ways you can make labyrinths. In the book, it has kind of a picture of a 7-cycle or circuit labyrinth, but there's so many ways, and they can be very simple. You could have even people help build the labyrinth as a part of it, or you could have one that is already there. But these walking the labyrinth, you could have them do it in their bare feet, which is what they did here. So it became a part of the earthing aspect of it, because they were in their bare feet, walking the labyrinth, which they just made it so they had checked to make sure there was nothing there that anybody was going to walk on and get hurt, right? So it was a great way for them to experience that. And it wasn't the paved part of the parking lot, it was the gravelly part of the parking lot. So it was a little bit of like foot acupressure as people walked on it too. So the invitations, there's just some listed in our book, but there's more invitations in this book by M. Amos Clifford that I'm sure you guys have looked through. There's also a book I'm going to share with you girls in just a little bit here that has a lot of other kinds of invitations, and it's called The Earth Prescription. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. Then the next piece of what's in this week's lesson is Qigong and yoga, which I think a lot of you have a lot of experience in this. But for those of you who are watching later, if you have questions, well, we have experts here in the group who could probably answer some questions for you. But here's the thing, whatever your practice is, maybe it's neither of those. Maybe you're just like, I like to go out for a walk and I just do some basic runner stretches. Whatever it is, it could be something very simple, but you want to have that opportunity where people start getting into their body a little bit, moving their body before you take them out to forest therapy. Guided journeys is another aspect of this lesson 3. And what is a guided journey? Well, a guided journey is, if you, I'm sure a lot of you know what it is. It's like when you're doing a guided visualization, somebody is having you relax, close your eyes, and then they're talking you through an experience. We use a little bit of guided journey work when we set the stage with people tuning into their senses, and then maybe having them close their eyes and think of a tree from their childhood, or imagine what story this flower would tell you, right? We're using this guided journey aspect to allow people to ignite their imagination. And I use that term imagination on purpose, right? Because if we tell people that they're going to tune into their own inner wisdom and they are going to be able to pick up messages from the tree and hear what the tree tells them, most people will say, I don't have that ability. I can't hear trees talk. That's not me. But if we say, I want you to use your imagination, and in your imagination, if you knew what that tree wanted to tell you, what would it be? And all of a sudden, we've opened the door. They don't have to have special abilities. It is their imagination. Here's the thing. Where does imagination come from? My belief is it comes from our ability to connect with our inner wisdom, our guides, and those beings that are around us. So we're getting to the same result. We've just invited people to use their imagination and not put them on the spot for it. And then the big piece I wanted to talk about today is the earthing and the difference in my mind between earthing and grounding, and how those terms get used interchangeably. But in our forest therapy practice, earthing has a specific meaning for me. If you have read or leafed through your earthing book by Clint Ober, it's very specific that there are currents of energy that run through the earth. They are measurable, they are real, they are not in our imagination. And these currents that are in the earth, humankind has been connected intimately with the earth for literally hundreds of thousands of years. And it's only been in the last 150 years that, and let's even make it less than that, it's probably been in the last 100 years that we have started really disconnecting ourselves from physically touching the earth on a daily basis. And hey, I live out on my farm, right? I'm outside a lot, but I will tell you, I've generally got my tennis shoes on, right? And it's that rubber sole that most people wear that disconnects us from the earth. In this week's lecture video that is on the website page, I have a fun little demonstration with a fun little toy that shows when a current is being connected. And I hope you enjoy the demonstration, because I show that whenever we are like, here's us in our bare feet and the little rod is there and it's touching the ground, the current's connected and we get the juice from the earth. But then I use a sock, a dry sock. And I'm like, all right, here's my dry sock connecting to the earth and there's no current. But if I spray my sock and I make it wet and I touch the earth, then the current connects. It's just a very visual way to show how current works and how important it is that if people want to really get all the benefits of being outside and of forest therapy, we need to have this earthing component. And I will tell you, there's a lot of people who do not want to walk barefoot outside. They're not going to do it. It doesn't matter how safe you said it is, they're just not going to do it. And so we need to have some ways in place when we create our earthing part of our program that they can still get the benefit. So generally, I incorporate that into what's called the sit spot. And the sit spot is when we're not walking around, right? We're encouraging somebody to find one place. They're going to sit there 15 or 20 minutes. And they're going to have, maybe they're noticing gravity, maybe they're noticing the clouds in the sky. They're going to have something that they're focusing on while they're sitting there so that their mind doesn't go back to the grocery list and what they need to do when they get home. They have a purpose of what they're doing while they're sitting there. If we had them bring a blanket and they're sitting on the ground, most of the time, they are going to be getting some great earthing benefit. You can even encourage them to maybe put their fingers in the grass, because all you need to be doing is touching one blade of grass, and that grass has its root in the earth, and they are going to be connected to that earth current, that earth energy. The more of them that touches the ground, the more current, of course, that's going to go through them. Not like they're going to feel it like zap, right? But there's going to be this wonderful energy from the earth that has been found to reduce inflammation. And in that sense of inflammation being the root of so many illnesses and pains and diseases, it causes a huge beneficial impact. So this book, The Earth Prescription, was written by an MD. And she talks about her own experience with how she realized what a difference it made when she had her little child, and her little child was very colicky. But whenever she would be in the house and she'd hold her and she'd bounce her and she'd rock her and she'd still be crying. And then one time she walked outside in her bare feet and was walking around the yard holding her, and she stopped crying. And she thought, well, maybe she was entertained by the yard. Maybe it was something like that. But she noticed there was this difference if she had shoes on or didn't have shoes on. And when she didn't have the shoes on and the mom was connected to the earth, she automatically transferred that earth energy to the baby, and the baby's colic subsided. So that's what her reason was for starting to study this. And in this book, it gives a lot of fun other invitations. A lot of them are maybe not your normal forest therapy kinds of things, because her whole thing is like, how can we stay connected? How can we really connect to the earth. And so reading it, it might give you some fun ideas, though, of ways you can have families come to a forest nature healing session and do some of the practices that are in here that are, I'll call it much more child-oriented, play-oriented, right? That aren't the meditative, what's the tree telling me, but is going to allow you to have that earthing practice built in a way that people don't notice it or don't feel weird about it. It's one thing to talk about earthing in the summer when we're all like, oh yes, I'll kick off my sandals and I'll wiggle my toes in the grass and it will feel so good. It's another thing to talk about earthing when it's winter, but it's just as important in the winter time. So there's ways we can still connect. If we're having people sit, and we have them sit on something like a metal bench, well, guess what? Metal conducts electricity or electrical current really well. So when somebody sits on a metal bench or a metal chair that's connected right onto the earth, they're going to be getting that earthing benefit without having their shoes off and without having to sit on the ground. If they're sitting on a stone or a rock, that's generally pretty conductive, and they will also get that same benefit. If they're sitting on a wooden chair, not as much, unless the wood is damp, right? Because it's the water that will conduct that current. So one of the things that I will do in winter forest therapy is I have a bunch of copper wire. Well, before I get to the copper wire, other things that you can do if you're not sitting and you're not taking your shoes off is if not only touching a blade of grass, but if we have somebody go up and they actually put their hands on the trunk of a tree, that tree is plugged into the earth. We can be earthing by touching the tree. We can also earth by putting, if we're holding hands with a leaf from the tree that's still attached, or the leaf of a shrub. And in some ways, the moistness of that leaf can conduct that energy even more than maybe some dried parts of the bark. Okay. So those are some ideas as the weather starts to turn and people are less likely than ever to take their shoes off. Copper wire. Copper is how we conduct electricity in our house, right? So another way, and the way that, Clint originally recognized that there was benefits in this energy from the ground, is he stuck a copper wire in the ground, ran it up in through his bedroom window and connected it onto a kind of a wire mat that he wove for himself, and he laid on it at night and his pain went away. And so we can use this copper wire in the same way. So I'll have a piece of copper wire for everybody. And when we get to that earthing piece of the forest therapy, I stick that copper wire in the ground, a couple inches, and then they just hold the other end of the copper wire in their hand. And so if it's cold and they've got gloves on, well, then just stick it inside the glove, right? So that you've got that skin connection. But that is the way they can literally be plugged into the ground and be getting that earthing energy. So winter is no excuse. I had a gal at a class last year from, I think from Sweden, and she had a great expression that came from the Northlands that was, there is no bad weather, there's only the wrong clothing. And so there, you can have forest therapy sessions in all seasons. It's just a matter of how we dress for it, how we prepare, and we can still do our earthing. Any questions about any of that? Are you girls all earthing girls already?
I have a question. And this might be interesting for you as well, Melanie, or maybe you have an answer. I met a few children and they have no imagination anymore, which I find so scary. They have no clue how to access their imagination. If they have a doll or a horse or whatever in their hands, and you ask what the name is of this plush animal, they say, well, a dog or a horse. They have no name for it, and it's blank. And it's so hard. So when you were talking, and I know you want to work with teenagers and bring them into the forest, when you talk about leading them through a story, it will be terribly hard for them to connect to anything. And this is my question. What do you think? What can we do to bring this back? Because well, if they have no imagination, they have no access to their second and fourth chakra. And this is very sad.
Well, some of them have stories and they can connect to stories, and you might not be calling it imagination, but they can connect to stories. And
Mhm.
some of them are very scientifically oriented kids. And so weaving in what we know about the science aspect of things is really interesting and exciting to them as well. Like what LuAnn was just talking about with earthing. This whole concept of, taking the copper wire and putting it into the ground, especially if you've done that bit beforehand, showing people, the electricity is flowing. Now it's not flowing. Now it's flowing. Now it's not flowing. Okay, so now we're going to put the wire in the ground and you're going to be able to hold that. And then to just notice what it feels like in your body.
Cool.
And it may feel like something or nothing. So I think all of, because it's a learned thing to learn to notice and observe. So I think the problem is that the word imagination doesn't work for a lot of kids
Okay.
anymore. So I think
Thank
some of it is just knowing your
Answer.
clients.
Thank you.
That is a sad thing. The kids won't even make up a name for their favorite little plushed animal.
Yeah, that is that.
It is sad. And now my mind is going to be going on that of like kids who feel that, I'll call it, have blocked off, have walled off their imagination. They've got it. They've just disconnected from it. I wonder how you can invite that back in, or what language, or as Melanie said, what story, because they watch so many stories or games. It's, it's not that they haven't been flooded with almost too much information. They don't have to use their imagination because they can just watch whatever. I
but
wonder
it's
how you
on the
invite
surface.
that.
All the stories stay on the surface, I would imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, the scientific aspect is wonderful. And yeah, I would love to try
Mhm.
this. Thank
I
you.
work with a lot of kids in STEM programs, which are the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics program. And these children, male, female, doesn't matter, whatever gender, that it's all for them. Like they want to understand the science of it. And so it works really well when you talk about the science of it because they love that part.
Mhm. And maybe there's ways. I am not fluent on the trendy movies, Disney, whatever's, with young people that might represent imagination for them to get started, right? Like be like, oh, would you ever watch Frozen? What do you think Elsa would do when she would go out into the forest and see a tree, right? Maybe posing it in a different way.
And you don't
Great.
have to know yourself if you have enough time, if your group is very small, to ask kids. Or you could even have them put it on a form. I mean, we do that all the time in pediatrics. Is before we do hypnosis with kids, we ask them, what kinds of things they really love and enjoy and are good at and excite them. And the contrary, what are the things that they don't like, that they find frightening or scary, or they like to avoid, so that you kind of like, if you know someone's afraid of bees, that would be really helpful to know. And if you know they really love something particular, you might have to go learn about it a little bit, or just to ask them to tell you about it and link it into the sensory awareness that you're cultivating.
These are such good questions.
Yes.
Well, Melanie, I know you said you have to go right away. Linda, did you have anything else you wanted to add or ask?
Just a little bit to that. Again, I still hold a position in corporate. So nobody has lack of imagination other than corporate people. I mean, that's almost the pinnacle, because as you get older and older, you lose it, right? To motivate my team and bring them together as a group, we do icebreakers. So we have cards that I've purchased online, and it's little things like, there are children's cards and there are adult cards, little things like, would you rather be in a cave or be in the forest? And then you answer the question and it creates a little bit of conversation. It opens up and allows people to work that way. The other thing is, maybe try art. I have pictures that I saved from my 3 daughters when they were like between 4 and 6 years old, because nobody has taught them how you're supposed to draw. So they're beautiful, beautiful paintings. My one daughter has 2 children. She has done the same thing. She said to me, Mom, how do I know when I find the right picture? And I said, you'll just know. So she's taken those and she's framed them as I did with hers. And she said her feeling of pride when she saw her piece of art up on the wall, like it was an important piece of art. And I said it was. She said that is something that she wanted to replicate with her children. So just all of those emotions and feelings that she's expressed about the way we treated her artwork. So just goes back to me again, LuAnn, something that twigged when you said, there's you're maybe not current. I mean, I think you're a lot more current than you give yourself credit for, but there's a lot of talk about art therapy now when people want to dip into their imagination. And there's also a lot of talk about psychedelics, but that's a completely different conversation. But just tapping into that untapped imagination, or whatever other word we want to think of it, just creating exercises to pull that out organically.
I loved your idea to give participants a journal or a little sketchbook or something to do something in nature when they have quiet time, because I think lots of people have to do something with their fingers or with something. It's hard to just sit still.
It is. And some people have a really tough time justifying why they would just be sitting there doing nothing, right? And so the journal book allows those folks to feel like, oh, I'm being productive because I'm writing down what I'm seeing, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. Time flies when I'm with you gals. So I will be posting this for the rest of the group to see, and I will see you all not next week, but the week after. So you have a couple weeks to get caught up on things.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.